So going back to old rocks, what's exciting you guys?
Oh, well, for me, it's the same story, but I think it's just building momentum very quietly, and it is more the exploration side than the larger companies. And I think what's really been quiet is that there's so many companies that are exploring right now. And a year ago, I just don't remember there being as much news to wait on. Like there were a lot of companies that were kind of just coming out of the bear market and they were still trying to raise money. And so there's just two sides of this. One, I've noticed a lot of money get raised, on the TSXV, like, and a lot of it has come through. And this is more the story that people at CEO.ca know, like, companies getting a strategic investment from a larger producer that may end up being an acquirer, but it loads up the smaller company to really hit on the exploration. But I will just keep
Hmm.
beating the drum on ASX companies, ASX listed especially. I mean, I just like it all signs point to this is the undervalued general area of the mining world. And it's amazing to me that every week I come across new companies that look like quality companies that are, under a 20 million market cap that I've
Hmm.
never heard of. Like that's like I research so much and I've never heard of them, and they're all over the world. And I think that Canadians, Americans, like a lot of people, they just really don't know that there's pretty much as many companies on the ASX as on the TSXV for the small junior space. But quality wise, it's right up there. And I know that people have their own biases, but that's for me, that's just the big story. I just keep finding them, and that's where I'm spending most of my time. I'll give you three things. So one which I mean, we'll see when this gets released, but I for like Africa in general and like for West Africa, there's always at least as many ASX companies as TSXV, and so number one country there is Ivory Coast, and that hasn't changed. But like that's there's not very many companies there, but you would have to look at the ASX to see any activity. So for one of the like most in my terms, my opinion, like big potential that very few people are following, the ASX is the place to be now. As another general region, I think it's very interesting that Latin America has so many ASX companies, and Australians actually discount Latin America at least as much as Africa as kind of a general region, or South America as a continent. And I think that's there's kind of an irony there. It's like it's a little further away for them than North Americans looking down to South America. And but like I think there that it's like the further away you go, the more risky something seems. And maybe it's also just that Australians don't have as much experience with it. But I know there was just a conference called Latin America Down Under. Like it just happened last week. So like you have all these companies, and I guess I can name some countries. I mean, like I'm surprised there's so many Australian companies in Brazil, for instance, or even or Mexico, or some in Nicaragua, like or I mean, like all over the place. And so that's really interesting because they tend to be more at a discount for that reason. But then the big one is Australia, and it's just like you're not going to find many TSXV listed companies in Australia. You'll find a ton of Australian ones, or ASX companies, obviously. But like the if you look at Australia and Canada as a parallel, I think just in general, whether going from explorers to larger, developers and producers, there's more of a discount, partially because the ASX is a smaller market, but sometimes you just can't really explain exactly why. And I think that the producers in Australia had been some of the best performing over the last couple of years, especially in the gold space. But there's so many more, like in Australia, that I haven't heard of, and I feel like I've heard of all of the big Canadian stories. But it's like that's what's fun is that you find these inefficiencies, and so whether we're looking at what are perceived to be really risky jurisdictions like in Africa, or a non-risky jurisdiction like Australia, most people would say Australia is not risky at all. You're finding opportunities either way by looking at the ASX.
I did not expect that. I thought they were mostly Australian-based companies.
Oh, you mean you thought that most of the ASX listed companies were hanging out just in Australia and not searching in other parts of the
Yes.
world?
Yes.
Yeah, it's so global. I think that that's just a huge discount, and it's yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, yeah, we can talk later about more Australian companies in like other parts of the world. It's just yeah, it did surprise me as well, and we'll see if everyone else catches on. None of this stuff matters if the the inefficiency or the re-rating doesn't happen. But that's of course that's my goal, is to try to introduce more people around the world to these ASX companies that seem undervalued. But we'll see if that happens.
One
Yeah.
thing that I am finding kind of interesting, and it's using just an indicator as a kind of a contrarian indicator kind of thing, is if you go on hot copper to a lot of these early stage exploration companies, they're just there's no activity right now. It's kind of this lull, or perhaps it is related to the summer doldrums or something. But I've just kind of been taken back and kind of fascinated with just even on days when there are news releases and you're looking like the most viewed forums or something on hot copper, and then you're picking out these other explorers, and it's kind of night and day contrast, where it's just like is there even anybody in this room anymore? And just comparing that to where sentiment was last year, around basically the summer of last year, when any company that was searching for gold, if you would go on any of these forums, there would be at least a few posts a day or something like that. And now I'm finding regularly there are rooms where there's been no post in the last month, or last few weeks, or something like that. So I just think, like Nick said, it's a lot easier right now to kind of look in this universe of gold stocks, and you're able to find a lot of undervalued companies, or ones that are at least trading. If they're not at their 52-week lows, they're just kind of consolidating and just hanging around, but they're not really doing anything. So it just kind of makes you think back in general what the overall sentiment towards the sector is right now. The actual prices of the metals, I mean, for gold in particular, it's kind of hanging around there. It's pretty solid support. It's I think it's like at 1260 right now. So it's not like the gold price is particularly weak, but I think the miners, they've either corrected back to fair value from all the froth that kind of existed last year.